The hospital room smelled of antiseptic and regret. Eleanor Grayson lay in the stiff bed, her body weakened by months of chemotherapy, her mind heavy with something far worse, betrayal. At 72, she had lived a life of grit and grace, building a modest empire from a small bakery into a chain of cafes across the state. Her 3 children, Lila, Marcus, and Claire, had grown up with the scent of fresh bread and the promise of a secure future. But now, as her life hung in the balance, she had discovered their true colors. It began with whispers, overheard through the haze of her illness. Lila, her eldest, had always been the pragmatic one, her sharp eyes calculating costs and benefits even as a child. Marcus, the middle child, was charming but impulsive, his charm often masking a hunger for quick wins. Claire, the youngest, was the dreamer, but her dreams had always leaned toward luxury she couldn't afford. Eleanor had trusted them, not just with her love, but with her legacy. She had set up trust funds for each, a safety net woven from years of her sweat and sacrifice. Yet, as she lay fighting for her life, she learned they had already begun dividing her assets, assuming her death was imminent. The memory of that discovery burned. It was a late-night conversation she wasn't meant to hear. Her nurse, a kind woman named Sarah, had left the door ajar, and the voices of her children drifted in from the hallway. "The downtown property is worth at least $2 million, Lila had said, her voice cold and precise. "If we sell now, we can reinvest before the market shifts." Marcus had chimed in, his tone eager, "And the beach house, Claire. You've always wanted that, right? We could split the rest." Claire's response was softer, almost hesitant, but she didn't object. Not one of them spoke of their mother's fight, her pain, or the possibility she might survive. Eleanor's hands trembled as she clutched the thin hospital blanket. She had raised them, loved them, forgiven their flaws. But this was a knife in her heart. She had always believed family was her strength, her reason to keep going. Now, it felt like a myth she'd told herself to survive the loneliness of her husband's death a decade ago. She closed her eyes, willing the tears to stay at bay. She wasn't dead yet, and she would not let them bury her before her time. The next morning, Dr. Patel entered with cautious optimism. "Your latest scans are promising, Eleanor," he said, his voice warm but measured. "The treatment is working better than we hoped. There's a real chance you'll pull through." For the first time in months, a spark of hope flickered in her chest. She nodded, her jaw tight. If she was going to live, she would do more than survive. She would reclaim what was hers. Over the next few weeks, Eleanor's strength began to return, though her heart remained heavy. She kept her recovery quiet, sharing it only with Sarah, who had become more than a nursery confidant. Eleanor asked Sarah to keep visitors limited, claiming she needed rest. In truth, she needed time to think, to plan. She had spent her life building something for her children, but they had shown her they didn't deserve it. Not yet, perhaps not ever. She requested her lawyer, Arthur Klein, to visit discreetly. Arthur was an old friend, a man who had seen her through the legal battles of her business's early days. When he arrived, his face was etched with concern, but Eleanor wasted no time. "I want to know everything," she said, her voice low but firm. "What they've done, what they're planning." Arthur hesitated, then handed her a folder. Inside were documents, emails, bank statements, and drafts of agreements her children had drawn up. They had already consulted a lawyer of their own, moving to liquidate her properties and divide the profits. The trust funds, meant to secure their futures, were being treated as their inheritance, claimed before her body was even cold. Eleanor's breath caught. She had expected greed, but the speed and precision of their actions stunned her. "Can I stop this?" she asked Arthur, her voice barely above a whisper. He nodded slowly. You're still alive. Eleanor, you have every right to change the terms of your estate. She looked out the hospital window, where the world continued without her. Then that's what I'll do, she said. I'll cancel their trusts. Arthur's eyes widened. All of them? He asked. Eleanor didn't answer immediately. She thought of Lila's cold calculations, Marcus's eager opportunism, Claire's silent complicity. She thought of the bakery, the late nights kneading dough, the pride of signing her first lease. She thought of her husband, Robert, who had believed in her when no one else did. This was their legacy, not a prize for her children to carve up. Yes, she said finally. All of them. Eleanor's decision felt like a stone dropping into still water, sending ripples she couldn't yet see. Canceling the trusts was not just a legal act. It was a severance, a declaration that her love had limits. She spent sleepless nights in the hospital, her body mending while her mind wrestled with the weight of it. Was she being too harsh? Was there a chance her children could change? But each time doubt crept in, she remembered their voices in the hallway, dividing her life's work as if she were already gone. Arthur worked quickly, drafting new documents to revoke the trusts. Eleanor insisted on one condition: her children would not be informed until she was ready. She wanted to face them herself, to see their reactions when they learned their plans had crumbled. It wasn't vengeance, she told herself, though the line felt blurry. It was justice for her, for Robert, for the years she'd poured into a family that had turned on her. As her strength returned, so did her resolve. She began physical therapy, pushing through the pain of weakened muscles. Sarah cheered her on, her encouragement a quiet anchor. You're tougher than anyone I've ever met, Sarah said one afternoon as Eleanor gripped the parallel bars, taking shaky steps. Eleanor managed a small smile. I've had to be, she replied. But inside, she wondered if toughness was enough to mend what her children had broken. When she was discharged, Eleanor returned to her homey, modest but elegant house filled with memories of Robert and the early days of their marriage. The air felt stale, as if the betrayal had seeped into the walls. She avoided the family photos on the mantel, unable to bear the sight of her children's younger, innocent faces. Instead, she focused on rebuilding her life. She visited her flagship cafe, where the staff greeted her with tears and hugs. The smell of fresh coffee and warm pastries grounded her, reminding her of what she'd built and why it mattered. Her children, however, were slower to notice her recovery. Lila called occasionally, her tone clipped and formal, asking about doctor's appointments but never lingering. Marcus sent texts, breezy and vague, promising to visit soon. Claire was the only one who came by, but her visits were awkward, her eyes darting as if she feared Eleanor knew too much. Eleanor played along, keeping her knowledge of their plans hidden. She wanted them to feel secure in their assumptions, to believe their mother was still frail, still fading. One evening, as she sat at her kitchen table reviewing Arthur's latest drafts, the phone rang. It was Lila, her voice unusually warm. Mom, we're planning a family dinner, she said, to celebrate your recovery. All of us, together. Eleanor's grip tightened on the phone. She could hear the undercurrent of strategy in Lila's tone, the careful orchestration of a moment meant to soothe or distract. That sounds lovely, Eleanor replied, her voice steady. Let's do it. The dinner was set for the following week at Lila's house, a sleek modern home that screamed ambition. Eleanor spent the days leading up to it preparing not just for the meal, but for the confrontation she knew was coming. She met with Arthur again, finalizing the paperwork. The trusts were officially revoked, the funds redirected to a foundation she planned to establish for young entrepreneurs, a cause close to her heart. She also made a bold move. She transferred ownership of her cafes to a holding company under her sole control, ensuring her children could not touch them. The night of the dinner, Eleanor dressed carefully, choosing a deep blue dress that made her feel regal, unbreakable. She arrived at Lila's house with a calm she hadn't felt in months. Her children greeted her with smiles that didn't reach their eyes. The table was set with fine china, the air heavy with the scent of roasted lamb and their unspoken agendas. As dessert was served, Eleanor set her plan in motion. "I have something to share," she said, her voice cutting through the chatter. The room fell silent, and she felt the weight of their gazes. Lila's calculating. Marcus is uneasy. Claire's nervous. "I'm stronger now," she continued. "Stronger than I've been in years. And because of that, I've made some changes." She paused, letting the words settle. "I've canceled your trust funds." The silence that followed was deafening. Lila's fork clattered against her plate. Marcus's mouth opened, but no words came. Claire's eyes filled with tears, but Eleanor couldn't tell if they were from guilt or loss. She pressed on, her voice steady but laced with pain. "I heard you. In the hospital. Dividing my life like I was already gone. You didn't wait. Didn't hope. Didn't care. So I've decided to protect what's mine." Lila recovered first, her voice sharp. "Mom, you can't do this. Those trusts were for us. For our future." Marcus joined in, his charm replaced by indignation. "You're punishing us for planning ahead. That's unfair." Claire said nothing, her hands twisting in her lap. Eleanor met their eyes, one by one. "Unfair," she said softly. "Unfair was assuming I was dead. Unfair was carving up my life's work while I fought to live." She stood, her chair scraping against the floor. "You're my children, and I love you. But love doesn't mean letting you destroy what I built. If you want a legacy, earn it." She left them there, stunned and silent, and walked into the night, her heart heavy but her spirit unbowed. The weeks following the dinner were a storm of silence and rage. Eleanor's children didn't call, didn't visit, didn't text. The absence was both a relief and a wound. She had expected their anger, but the depth of their silence cut deeper than she'd imagined. Still, she refused to waver. She threw herself into her work, spending long hours at her cafes, reconnecting with her staff, and sketching plans for the foundation. It was a way to fill the void, to remind herself that her life had purpose beyond her children's betrayal. But the quiet couldn't last. One gray afternoon, Lila appeared at the flagship cafe, her face a mask of controlled fury. She sat across from Eleanor at a corner table, her posture rigid. "You've made a mistake," Lila said, her voice low. "You think you're teaching us a lesson, but you're tearing this family apart." Eleanor sipped her coffee, her hand steady. "You tore it apart first," she replied. "I'm just protecting what's left." Lila leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. "You don't get it, Mom. We were trying to secure our futures, to make sure everything you built didn't fall apart if you didn't make it." The words hung between them, heavy with half-truths. Eleanor wanted to believe her, wanted to see the daughter who used to braid her hair and laugh over cookie dough. But she couldn't unhear the hallway conversation, couldn't erase the cold precision of Lila's plans. "Then why didn't you talk to me?" Eleanor asked, her voice softer now, tinged with hurt. "Why didn't you wait?" Lila's mouth opened, then closed. For the first time, Eleanor saw a flicker of doubt in her daughter's eyes. But it vanished quickly, replaced by defiance. "You were dying," Lila said bluntly. "We had to act." Eleanor shook her head, the weight of those words settling like stones. "I wasn't dying," she said. "And I'm not now." Lila left without another word, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor. Eleanor watched her go, her heart aching but her resolve intact. She knew this wasn't the end. Marcus and Claire would come next, each with their own arguments, their own justifications. And she would face them, just as she had faced Lila. Sure enough, Marcus arrived the next day, his charm dialed up to mask his desperation. He found Eleanor in her office, surrounded by ledgers and plans for the foundation. "Mom, come on," he said, flashing the smile that had always gotten him out of trouble. "This is crazy. You don't need to punish us like this. We're family." Eleanor looked at him, seeing the boy who used to beg for extra frosting, now a man who saw her life's work as a payout. "Family doesn't divide up their mother's legacy behind her back," she said quietly. Marcus's smile faltered. "It wasn't like that," he insisted, but his voice lacked conviction. He left soon after, promising to fix this. But Eleanor knew there was no fixing what had been broken. Claire was the last to confront her, and her approach was different. She came to Eleanor's house one evening, her eyes red from crying. "Mom, I'm sorry," she said, her voice trembling. "I didn't want to go along with it. But Lila and Marcus, they made it sound like we had no choice." Eleanor's heart softened at Claire's tears, but she couldn't ignore the truth. "You had a choice," she said gently. "You chose silence." Claire sobbed, but Eleanor didn't comfort her. Not this time. She needed Claire to feel the weight of her actions, to understand what trust meant. As the days turned into weeks, Eleanor focused on her foundation. She named it the Grayson Legacy Fund, a tribute to Robert and their shared dreams. The foundation would support young entrepreneurs, particularly those from underserved communities, giving them the tools and resources to build their own legacies. It was a way to extend her life's work, to ensure it lived beyond her. She poured her energy into it, meeting with potential partners, drafting grant proposals, and visiting community centers to spread the word. But even as she built something new, the rift with her children haunted her. She wondered if she'd been too harsh, if there was a way to rebuild what had been lost. Late at night, she would sit by the window, staring at the stars, and think of Robert. He had always believed in second chances, in the power of love to heal. But he wasn't here to guide her now, and she felt the weight of her choices alone. One afternoon, Sarah, the nurse who had become her friend, stopped by with a batch of homemade cookies. "You're doing the right thing," Sarah said, sensing Eleanor's doubt. "You're showing them what strength looks like. They'll come around or they won't. But you're living for you now." Eleanor nodded, grateful for the words, but unsure if she believed them. She wanted her children to understand, to grow, to earn her trust again. But she couldn't force it. All she could do was keep moving forward, one step at a time. The Grayson Legacy Fund took shape faster than Eleanor had expected. By spring, she had secured partnerships with local businesses and a grant from a national foundation. The work was exhilarating, a reminder of the fire that had driven her to build her cafes from nothing. She hired a small team, including a young woman named Maya, whose passion for community outreach reminded Eleanor of her younger self. Maya's energy was infectious, and Eleanor found herself smiling more, laughing even, as they brainstormed ways to support aspiring entrepreneurs. But the shadow of her children lingered. Lila had gone silent again, her anger a wall Eleanor couldn't breach. Marcus sent occasional texts, each one a mix of charm and subtle accusations, as if he could wear her down. Claire was the only one who kept trying, leaving voicemails that wavered between apologies and pleas. "Mom, I want to make this right," she said in one message, her voice breaking. "Please, let me try." Eleanor listened to the voicemails late at night, her heart torn between forgiveness and the memory of betrayal. One morning, as Eleanor prepared for a meeting with potential donors, she received an unexpected visitor, Arthur, her lawyer, his face grim. "They're fighting back," he said, handing her a legal document. Lila and Marcus had hired a lawyer to contest the revocation of their trusts, claiming Eleanor was not of sound mind when she made the decision. The accusation stung, a fresh wound atop the old. "They're saying the cancer," The chemoid impaired your judgment. Arthur explained. They're trying to reinstate the trusts. Eleanor's hands shook as she read the document. The legal jargon was cold, clinical, but the intent was clear. Her children were willing to drag her through court to get what they wanted. She thought of the hospital, the hallway, their voices carving up her life. She thought of Claire's silence, her failure to stand up to her siblings. What are my options? Eleanor asked, her voice steady despite the storm inside. Arthur outlined the possibilities: fight the lawsuit, which could be costly in public, or negotiate a settlement. But knowing you, he added with a small smile, you're not the settling type. Eleanor nodded, her jaw tight. I'm not, she said. Let them try. I'm not backing down. The lawsuit became a quiet war. Eleanor hired a top litigator, a woman named Vanessa who specialized in estate disputes. Vanessa was fierce, her confidence a bolster to Eleanor's resolve. They don't have a strong case, Vanessa said after reviewing the documents. You were lucid. You had witnesses, and your medical records show improvement. This is more about intimidation than evidence. Eleanor trusted her, but the process was draining. Court dates loomed, and the media caught wind of the dispute, splashing headlines about the Grayson family feud across local papers. The attention was humiliating, but Eleanor refused to hide. She continued her work with the foundation, speaking at community events and mentoring young entrepreneurs. At one event, a young man named Jamal thanked her for a grant that had helped him start a food truck. His gratitude, raw and unfiltered, brought tears to her eyes. You believed in me, he said, shaking her hand. No one else did. Those words stayed with her, a reminder of why she was fighting not just for herself, but for those who needed a chance, just as she had. Claire showed up at one of these events, unannounced. Eleanor spotted her in the crowd, her face pale and uncertain. After the event, Claire approached, her hands twisting nervously. Mom, I didn't sign the lawsuit, she said quickly. I told Lila and Marcus I wouldn't. I know what we did was wrong. Eleanor studied her daughter, searching for sincerity. Claire's eyes were wet, her voice shaky but earnest. I want to help with the foundation, Claire continued. I want to earn your trust back. Eleanor didn't respond immediately. She wanted to believe Claire, wanted to see the daughter who used to draw pictures of their family in crayon. But trust was a fragile thing, and Claire had broken it. Words aren't enough, Eleanor said finally. Show me. Work for it. Claire nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. I will, she promised. Eleanor watched her walk away, unsure if this was a step toward healing or another false hope. As the court date approached, Eleanor prepared herself for battle. She met with Vanessa daily, reviewing documents and strategizing. The foundation continued to grow, a beacon of purpose in the chaos. But at night, alone in her house, Eleanor felt the weight of her choices. She had built a legacy for her children, only to watch them tear it apart. Now, she was building something new, something bigger than herself. But could she let go of the past? Could she forgive her children? Or was the wound too deep? The courtroom was colder than Eleanor had expected, both in temperature and atmosphere. She sat at the plaintiff's table, her hands folded tightly in her lap, as Vanessa presented their case. Lila and Marcus sat across the room, their lawyer a sleek man in a tailored suit who spoke with polished confidence. Claire was conspicuously absent, a fact that both comforted and pained Eleanor. The judge, a stern woman with sharp eyes, listened intently as the arguments unfolded. Vanessa was relentless, dismantling the claim that Eleanor had been mentally impaired. She presented medical records, testimonies from Dr. Patel and Sarah, and even Eleanor's recent work with the Grayson Legacy Fund as evidence of her clarity and competence. Mrs. Grayson is not only of sound mind, Vanessa said. her voice ringing through the courtroom. But she is actively building a legacy that benefits her community, not just her family. Lila and Marcus's lawyer countered with accusations of coercion, claiming Eleanor had been influenced by outside parties to change her estate. The argument was weak, but it stung. Eleanor felt the eyes of the courtroom on her strangers. Reporters. Her own children. She wanted to stand and shout, to tell them how it felt to hear her life divided like a carcass while she fought for breath. But she stayed silent, letting Vanessa fight for her. When it was her turn to speak, Eleanor took the stand with a calm she didn't fully feel. She looked at Lila and Marcus, their faces unreadable, and told the truth. "I heard them," she said, her voice steady but thick with emotion. "In the hospital, when I was supposed to be dying, they were planning to sell my properties, to divide my assets. They didn't wait to see if I'd live. They didn't care." The courtroom was silent, the weight of her words hanging heavy. "I canceled their trusts because they broke mine." The judge's ruling came swiftly. The revocation of the trusts was upheld. Lila and Marcus had no legal claim to the funds, no grounds to contest Eleanor's decision. As the gavel fell, Eleanor felt a rush of relief, but it was bittersweet. She had won, but at what cost? Her children left the courtroom without looking at her, their silence louder than any words. Outside, the air was crisp, the sky a pale blue. Eleanor stood alone, watching as Lila and Marcus drove away. She wondered if they felt shame, or only anger. She wondered if Claire's absence meant she was truly trying to change. The victory felt hollow, a reminder of the family she'd lost even as she reclaimed her power. Back at home, Eleanor threw herself into the foundation with renewed vigor. The first grants were awarded, and she attended the launch of Jamal's food truck, where he served spicy tacos to a crowd of cheering customers. His smile was infectious, and for a moment, Eleanor forgot her pain. She saw Robert in Jamal's pride, in the way he shook hands and thanked his supporters. This was what she'd always wanted to build, something that mattered, that lifted others up. Claire began volunteering at the foundation, showing up quietly to help with paperwork or events. She didn't push for forgiveness, didn't demand attention. She simply worked, her presence a tentative bridge. Eleanor watched her closely, noting the way she listened to Maya's ideas, the way she stayed late to organize files. It wasn't enough, not yet, but it was a start. One evening, as they sorted applications together, Claire spoke up. "I was wrong," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I should have stopped them. I should have believed in you." Eleanor looked at her daughter, seeing the weight of regret in her eyes. "I know," Eleanor said softly, "but knowing isn't enough. You have to keep showing me." Claire nodded, tears brimming but unshed. For the first time, Eleanor felt a flicker of hope, not for the past, but for what might come. The foundation grew, drawing attention from local media and national organizations. Eleanor was invited to speak at a conference for women entrepreneurs, where she shared her story, not the betrayal, but the resilience, the choice to build something new. The audience applauded, some with tears in their eyes, and Eleanor felt a surge of purpose. She was no longer just a mother, a widow, a survivor. She was Eleanor Grayson, a woman who had faced death and betrayal and come out stronger. But late at night, when the house was quiet, she still thought of Lila and Marcus. She wondered if they'd ever understand, if they'd ever see her not as a source of wealth, but as a person who had loved them fiercely. She kept their photos on the mantle, a reminder of what was and what might still be. She wasn't ready to give up on them, not entirely, but she was ready to live for herself. The seasons changed, and with them, Eleanor's life found a new rhythm. The Grayson Legacy Fund became a beacon in the community, its grants transforming dreams into reality. Maya took on more responsibility, her confidence growing as she led workshops and mentored applicants. Eleanor watched her with pride, seeing echoes of her younger self in Maya's determination. The work was demanding, but it filled the spaces where her children's absence ached. Claire continued her quiet efforts to rebuild trust. She didn't push, didn't demand forgiveness, but her consistency spoke louder than words. She organized a fundraiser for the foundation, a small event that raised enough to fund 3 new grants. At the event, she gave a short speech, her voice trembling but clear. "My mother taught me what it means to build something from nothing," she said, glancing at Eleanor. "I'm here to learn from her, to make things right." The crowd applauded, but Eleanor's eyes were on Claire, searching for the truth behind her words. After the event, they sat together in Eleanor's office, the air heavy with unspoken questions. "Why now?" Eleanor asked, her voice gentle but direct. "Why are you trying so hard?" Claire looked down, her fingers tracing the edge of the desk. "Because I see you now," she said. "Not just as mom, but as you. What you've built, what you've fought for. I was selfish, and I'm sorry." Eleanor's throat tightened. She wanted to reach out, to pull Claire into her arms, but she held back. "Keep going," she said instead. "Show me you mean it." Lila and Marcus remained distant, their anger a wall Eleanor couldn't climb. She heard through mutual friends that Lila had taken a high-powered job in another city, throwing herself into work as if to erase the past. Marcus, ever the opportunist, had started a business venture that was struggling to take off. Eleanor felt a pang of guilt had she pushed them too far. But she pushed it aside. They had made their choices, just as she had. One afternoon, a letter arrived from Marcus. It was short, scrawled in his familiar, messy handwriting. "I'm sorry," it read. "I didn't think about what it meant to you. I'm trying to do better." There was no plea for forgiveness, no mention of the trusts. Just an apology, raw and unpolished. Eleanor read it again and again, her heart caught between hope and caution. She tucked the letter into a drawer, not ready to respond, but unable to throw it away. The foundation's success brought new challenges. A national organization offered a partnership that could expand its reach, but it required Eleanor to travel and speak more often. She hesitated, her body still bearing the scars of her illness. But Maya and Claire encouraged her, their faith in her a quiet strength. "You've got this," Maya said, grinning. "You're Eleanor Grayson." Claire nodded, her eyes steady. "You've always been unstoppable." Eleanor took the leap, traveling to cities she hadn't visited in years. She spoke about resilience, about building a legacy that outlives you, about the power of second chances. Her story resonated, drawing crowds and inspiring others to share their own. She felt Robert's presence in those moments, his belief in her carrying her forward. But she also felt the absence of Lila and Marcus, a reminder that some wounds heal slower than others. Back home, Claire began to take on a larger role in the foundation. She proposed a mentorship program, pairing young entrepreneurs with established business owners. Eleanor approved it, impressed by Claire's initiative. They worked side by side, their conversations cautious but growing warmer. One evening, as they reviewed applications, Claire said, "I want to be someone you're proud of, Mom." Eleanor paused, her heart swelling. "You're getting there," she said, and for the first time, she meant it. But the past wasn't done with her. A reporter contacted Eleanor, asking for an interview about the family feud that had made headlines. She declined, but the request stirred memories of the courtroom, of Lila and Marcus's cold stares. She wondered if they'd ever reach out, if they'd ever see her as more than a means to an end. She thought of Marcus's letter, of Claire's quiet persistence. Maybe there was hope, but it would take time she was willing to give, but not at the cost of her own peace. Eleanor stood in her cafe one morning, watching the sunrise paint the walls gold. The scent of fresh bread filled the air, a reminder of where she'd started. She had lost so much: her health, her trust, her children's love, but she had gained something too, a purpose that was hers alone, a legacy that would outlive her. She wasn't done fighting. Not for herself, not for the foundation, and maybe, just maybe, not for her family. A year after the courtroom victory, Eleanor's life was a tapestry of new beginnings and lingering scars. The Grayson Legacy Fund had become a national name, its grants changing lives across the country. Eleanor was no longer just the woman who had beaten cancer or outsmarted her children's greed. She was a symbol of resilience, a beacon for those who refused to be defined by their pain. Claire had become a cornerstone of the foundation, her dedication unwavering. She led the mentorship program with a passion that surprised Eleanor, earning the respect of the team and the community. Their relationship was still fragile, but it was growing stronger, rooted in shared purpose. One afternoon, as they celebrated the launch of a new grant cycle, Claire pulled Eleanor aside. "I love you, Mom," she said, her voice steady. "And I'm so proud to be your daughter." Eleanor hugged her, tears stinging her eyes. It wasn't forgiveness. Not entirely. But it was a step toward healing. Lila remained distant, her life a mystery Eleanor could only glimpse through mutual acquaintances. She had risen in her new job, her ambition undimmed. But there was no word of regret or reconciliation. Eleanor sent her a letter, simple and direct, inviting her to visit the foundation, to see what they were building. She didn't expect a response, but she sent it anyway. A door left open. Marcus's path was less certain. His business venture had failed, and he reached out to Eleanor, not for money, but for advice. They met at a small diner, the air thick with tension. "I messed up," he admitted, his eyes avoiding hers. "I didn't see what you were fighting for. I just saw what I wanted." Eleanor listened, her heart torn between anger and hope. "You can still change," she said. "But it's not my job to fix you." Marcus nodded, his face weary but determined. "I know," he said. "I'm trying." The meeting was brief, but it planted a seed. Marcus began volunteering at a community center, coaching young athletes. It was a small step, but Eleanor heard about it through Maya, who had connections in the community. She didn't reach out, didn't push, but she watched from afar, hoping he would find his way. Eleanor's health remained stable, though she carried the fatigue of her illness like a quiet passenger. She leaned on Sarah, who had become a close friend, and on the foundation's team, who had become a kind of family. She spoke at more conferences, her story inspiring others to face their own betrayals, their own battles. She wrote a memoir, not about the feud, but about the power of rebuilding, of choosing yourself when others let you down. The book was a quiet success, its proceeds going to the foundation. One evening, as Eleanor sat in her garden, the air warm with summer's end, she received a package. Inside was a photo album, its pages filled with pictures of her cafes, her foundation events, and moments from her life she hadn't realized were captured: her laughing with Maya, speaking at a conference, hugging Claire at the fundraiser. There was no note, but the handwriting on the package was Lila's. Eleanor's breath caught, her fingers tracing the photos. It wasn't an apology, but it was something: a gesture, a crack in the wall. She placed the album on her mantle, next to the old family photos. The past and present sat side by side, a reminder that healing was messy, incomplete, but possible. Eleanor had lost her children's trust, but she had found her own strength. She had built a legacy, not just for them, but for the world, and she had done it on her terms. As the stars appeared overhead, Eleanor thought of Robert, of the love that had carried her through her darkest days. She thought of Claire's quiet redemption, Marcus's tentative steps, Lila's silent gesture. She thought of the young entrepreneurs whose lives she'd changed, of the foundation that would outlive her. And she smiled, not because the pain was gone, but because she had survived it. She had reclaimed her life, her purpose, her heart. And that, she knew, was enough.